Threat Intel Reports, How Reactionary Should You Be? And the RSA Conference, How to Stand Out on the Show Floor. That and the latest news and trends in the managed security space coming right up on Cyber for Hire.
Building bridges between managed security providers and their clients, it's the podcast where MSPs, vCISOs, and end users take a united stand against cybercrime. This is Cyber for Hire.
All right, welcome friends to episode number 18 of Cyber for Hire. How's everybody doing today? I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media in New York, and joining me today on the other side of the Continental Divide in Utah is my co-host and partner in cybercrime, Ryan Morris, principal consultant with Morris Management Partners. Ryan, it's here. The RSA conference is in full swing as of the airing of this episode. Gotta admit, my FOMO is kicking in big time because neither of us happen to make it out there this particular time, but still always a very exciting and hectic time of the year.
It's a very hectic time of the year, but I will tell you, some of the very best advice that you and I have received from our expert guests is when you go to that show, remember, put your phone in airplane mode, take a burner phone, do not bring your real devices if you can at all afford to do that, because you know who else is also attending the RSA show. All the good guys, also some of the bad guys.
That's very true. Very good advice. I remember the very first time I did one of the DEF CON conferences, and I just felt like the entire time, like I was looking over my shoulder, like who's sitting next to me? And then I remember opening up my computer one time, and just for a split second, it started to latch on to the local Wi-Fi connection. And I was like, oh, don't do that.
The first time, you remember back years ago when everybody was first talking about the built-in camera on your laptop and, whether you should have a cover on that. My first reaction when I heard that was, please, come on, let's not be so overreactionary. And then I went to RSA, and literally every white hat in the entire facility had either a sticky or a piece of tape or something over their own camera. And I was like, okay, so maybe I am going to take that seriously.
Yep. Listen, you can never be too careful, right?
Never.
Anyway, plenty to cover today, as always. But some news is just so important that it can't wait, which is why we want to share with everyone what's top of mind today. So here's your headline. The security researcher who goes by the moniker Costas has warned that cybercriminals have started abusing the remote monitoring and management tool Action One, used by many MSPs and MSSPs and they've been using it, these adversaries, to gain a foothold into already compromised networks to perform reconnaissance and execute commands and code. Bleeping Computer notes in an article that the software is typically used normally legitimately to automate the installation of software updates and patches on endpoints, and the free version of the tool is available at no cost for up to 100 endpoints. To be clear here, the Action One platform itself was not compromised. However, again, any previously compromised company whose admins or whose MSSP uses Action One might be especially vulnerable to this campaign, as they might believe the illegal activity to be legitimate. So, Ryan, why is this top of mind for you?
See, I think we are getting one more layer into the onion of understanding our own internal tools and the impact that can have on our clients and their cyber posture, right? We've heard about actual RMMs and PSA tools being compromised, but in this case, the tool itself is absolutely fine, and it's doing exactly what it was designed to do: deliver code. Automate tasks, install software. That's what it was used for. And I will say, having been around the managed services business for a couple of decades now, I remember when the tools first became a thing, right? We used to do this with regular technology and a lot of Excel spreadsheets, and we didn't have automated resources for software distribution or monitoring or anything, right? When that first started coming into play, that was a very important maturing step for the industry, right? We became real when we could have tools to automate it. I think maybe we need at this point to just remember the best advice that any of us have ever received. First, take care of your own health, right? Put on your mask first before helping anybody else. This is an especially shocking type of a situation because it's a tool that in normal protocol isn't going to be flagged as doing anything inappropriate, right? We always look for normal baseline and then variations from that to figure out what is potentially an alert. In this case, hey, it's just doing its job and it's not going to alert anything. That's super scary if we are not also checking ourselves. So, physician, first heal thyself, and then let's go out and start talking to customers because our tool sets are very central and they are a very good multiplying point to get into everything that we do with our customers. So let's make sure our tool sets are clean.
Very well put, Ryan. And we certainly want to hear from our audience as well on this, if you agree or disagree or have any other thoughts. So please write to us at always at cyberforhire at cyberriskalliance.com. Anyway, that's going to be our top of mind hot take for the day. More news later in the show. But first, it's time for our featured InfoSec news and strategy topic of the week, presenting our big idea in security, threat intel reports. How reactionary should you be? Your favorite intelligence feeds are warning of several new campaigns that are victimizing companies, much like your clients. Maybe they're even targeting MSSPs themselves. Now it's up to you to assess and prioritize these latest threats and determine to what extent they require you to change your approach, institute additional safeguards, or update your security awareness messaging. What's a reasonable response? What's a knee-jerk overreaction? This session will examine how managed services providers and security professionals in general should and shouldn't react to the latest threat intel release. And our guest will also review some of his favorite top trends and incidents from this past Verizon data breach investigations report. So to discuss this further, we'd like to welcome in our guest speaker, Juan Valencia, Executive Consulting Partner within Verizon Enterprise Solutions Cybersecurity Consulting Organization. More specifically, Juan leads Verizon's executive consulting team, offering executive-level advisory services that include risk management, risk scoring, and strategic journey maps for CIOs and CISOs. He also spearheads Verizon's cyber risk monitoring consulting services. Juan has been in the InfoSec field for 22 years with stints in companies such as Wachovia and GE. Prior to joining Verizon, he held various InfoSec consulting and corporate positions, at one point managing the security governance program of a well-known media company. Juan, thanks so much for being here. It's great that you could join us, and as always, you're going to jump right into it. So this is really a subject matter that is applicable to both MSSPs who are managing security for their clients, but also really all security practitioners and CISO types that are interested in the latest threat intelligence. It's important to find that middle ground when it comes to responding to the latest intel reports. You can't necessarily just constantly be reacting to everything immediately. There has to be some level of priority, I imagine, and some of that is trying to figure out what should qualify as high priority or what's lower priority. So maybe you could take us through that a little bit and how you make that determination.
No, there's no question. And thanks, Bradley. Appreciate you having me. And it's really funny when Ryan was talking earlier about how people were talking about putting a little tape on their cameras, right? And I was like you, Ryan. That's completely overreaction. Come on, that's overblown, right? And of course, you're absolutely right. Now everybody does it. Heck, laptops come with that thing now, right? Little thing you can put on them now, right? So where at first we thought it was overreaction, we then later found out that hey, maybe it's not overreaction. That is indeed a possibility. Now, is it a remote possibility? Of course it is, right? But it is indeed a possibility, and we don't want to take any chances in this field. And that is akin to threat intelligence and how we react to it and how we use threat intelligence and how we protect our customers in our own data, right? It is easy to overreact, right? But then at one point do you say, maybe there is no such thing as overreaction, right? And take every case seriously. I'll give you an example. All right, I travel over the country, and of course, as you know, I'm part of the data breach investigations report team here at Verizon, DBIR team. So we see all the data, right? Every single day, we see data. And we know that, about 50% or so, roughly about 50% of all data breaches start with some kind of human interaction, okay? A phishing. Somebody clicks on something they shouldn't have clicked. They open something they shouldn't have opened. Something along those lines, right? And I received this email, and it was my boss sending me like a $50 certificate or something. But Verizon uses like an external company to manage this program. And I looked at the link, and I'm like, that just doesn't look right to me, right? And well, I see the statistics, and I am not going to be the one cybersecurity consultant at Verizon who's going to click on something and bring the company down, right? So, so I immediately forwarded that to our internal cert, right? And within 5 minutes, they came back and said, "No, Juan, that's fine. You can click on it. That's a legitimate link." Okay, great. And that bothered me. I'm like, I bet you they're thinking that I'm an idiot, right? And then I started thinking, no, I bet you not. I bet you they're grateful for that, because they would rather spend 5 minutes investigating that link than spend the next 6 weeks trying to recover from a ransomware attack, right? So I tie that back to, do we overreact? Is there? I don't think so. Now, the amount of data that we receive is massive, absolutely massive, right? Especially in a company like ours, where we have, somewhere in the neighborhood about 10,000 honeypots throughout the world, right? You can imagine the kind of data that we're gathering. So it is difficult to, obviously, well, virtually impossible to look at every possible single packet, obviously, right? So you do have to prioritize. But once the tool sets give you the prioritization, I don't know that there's any, I don't know that the word overreaction should be in our vocabulary, right? Look, again, this is from our own data, right? This is we collect a lot of data for a data breach investigations report. We have our own threat intel feeds. We have the whole infrastructure, right? So and every single time, maybe not every single time, but I stopped being surprised when I go on site, okay, for an investigation, and come to find out that the company wasn't using MFA for critical service, for example, right? That once a threat actor gets in, it's flat networks everywhere, right? They're using deprecated protocols. They're not using server-side or client-side certificates, on and on and on, right? A lot of companies don't use PAM, those kinds of things. So I stopped, and it's kind of a sad statement to make, but I stopped being surprised, right, at some of the things that we see. Therefore, my initial overreaction is to say we're not overreacting, right? Because you just don't know. And almost every week, we're surprised, right? Look, not a week goes by where we don't get a phone call from somebody, usually a client, saying, I am a victim of a ransomware attack, and I need to stand up 40 critical Windows servers from scratch. Okay? And as you guys know, that with the supply chain issues that we've been having lately, think about what it would take to stand up 40 critical Windows servers from scratch, including, by the way, the procurement of the hardware itself, the installation of the software, the applications. What do you do with legacy apps? By the way, does my current license still cover, new hardware, those kinds of things? And these are the kinds of things that people don't think about. But again, I tie that back to, how do we react to this? And you'd be surprised how often not reacting on time or not reacting swiftly will cost you. I'll give you a quick example. And I'm sorry, I'm rambling on. Is that okay if I give you a quick example?
No, you keep going. This is terrific.
You quick example. I will only say that it's a company in the UK. That's the only thing I will say. Okay, and remember, UK is more than just Britain. Okay, just but it's a company out in the UK, and we were on site. They were breached. So we were on site. I don't know, about 6 weeks or so. And unfortunately, the company just was not very mature. Major company, large company, not very mature, and had some issues, right? So we went in there, did the investigation, determined what happened, everything, combed through everything, gave them a nice thick 200-page report, and okay, great, they're on their own. Hey, this is what we think you should be doing to remediate. About 2.5 months, 2.5, 10, 11 weeks later, they called us back. Same client. So look, we see some funny stuff, right? And we're not quite sure what it is, but it's just not, it's abnormal activity. Would you mind coming over and taking a look? So we sent the same investigator that had been there 2.5 months prior, because he had been there 6 weeks. He knew their network really well. And he spent about a day or so, a day and a half poking around, and he went to the CIO and the CISO. And he said, listen, I can't prove this to you right now. This is just a hunch, okay? But from what I see, it just looks like, it's starting to look to me like someone's going to launch a ransomware attack. So give my team a couple of days. But in the meantime, I highly suggest that you bring your systems offline, okay, while we do this investigation. Just give us 24 or 48 hours, right? And see if we can figure out exactly what the threat actor is trying to do. And now, this was later in the evening, 7 o'clock in the evening or so. And the CIO and the CISO both said, well, we don't have the authority to take the systems offline. We have to talk to the board. So they set up a call with the board the very next morning, 8:30 in the morning, first thing in the morning, right? And in those 12, 13 hours, the threat actor managed to encrypt 70% of the company's systems. Okay? Now, here's the funny part, okay? Well, there's nothing funny about this, but, the interesting part. The only 30% that was not encrypted was because a rogue IT manager disobeyed orders and said, to hell with this, I'm taking my systems offline. Okay?
Wow.
And he managed to spare his systems from that attack. Okay? Now, so now every time I talk to a CISO, I go, do you have the authority to turn down systems? To bring systems offline? Yes or no? Right? And you would be surprised how many of them go, no. And then there's the others who say, I will not take the job unless I have that authority. Right? But the ones that act with authority, with a sense of urgency, do better, I guess is my point. Right? So they did not act with a sense of urgency whatsoever. I would have at that point just made a couple of phone calls and said, I need to take the systems offline. Right? They chose not to. Now, that ended up costing them, the last we've heard, this could have been, a couple of weeks, whatever. It ended up taking them 6 weeks to recover from scratch and cost them almost 46 million euro.
Wow. Huh.
Okay. Now, because of a lack of urgency.
Yeah.
Right. So,
See, and that's where you're coming from. And I love these real world stories because they do bring it back into the question of, we're not making this stuff up, right? Like that's always a common refrain in the security industry as humans that are naturally drawn to this line of work. We're curious. We're always sniffing. We're always looking around going, well, something seems a little bit not right. We're not content to just assume that everything's fine, and until it's not fine, don't worry about it, right? I think that's one of those characteristics of a good cyber pro. But that we all also live in a world of, I don't want to come off like the boy who cried wolf. I want to be able to present this back to the people, because those real world urgencies, I find your story especially funny because it's like, well, we have to think carefully about taking our systems offline. The ransomware guy, he did that for you. Don't worry about it. That's already been taken care of, right?
Exactly.
That could have been done. How can we as security professionals communicate these kinds of alerts without sounding like our hair's on fire, without sounding like, here comes that guy again, he's got another alert? Because like you say, they happen every single week. Here's another alert. Here comes that guy again. And all the business people are like, I just want to tune that person out because I don't want to be alarmed anymore. How do we do that?
So one thing that I have found to be very effective is providing people things like what I just did, a use case like this, right? Again, we get a lot of data, right? We analyze a lot of data, and I love to throw statistics out there because it brings the point home. Right, one of our partners from DBIR gave us this piece of data, and there's a little piece of a nugget. After a phishing exercise is launched, the average first click happens within 82 seconds. A minute and a half. A minute and a half. Okay. Now, our own research from Verizon. Okay, we've done some research ourselves, and we found out that we call it oh my god, I can't say the word inevitable of a click, the inevitability of a click. Okay, we call it. Usually, generally speaking, happens at around 19 or so email messages. In other words, if you send 18, 19 messages, there is a 100% likelihood that at least one person is going to click. Okay? Now, put all that stuff together, right? These folks, these threat actors aren't sending 18, 19 messages. They're sending 1,900, 19,000. Okay? And you know that someone's going to click within the first 32 seconds, right? And again, all it takes is just one person to click. One. And that's it. They got you. So one of the things that we try, aside from the really basic stuff, because I mean, again, you would be surprised how often we go on site and there's no MFA in place, right? So aside from telling you, do the basic security 101 stuff, you need to do, which we've been screaming it at the top of our lungs now for 20 years. Aside from that is actually bringing the point home of how important it is. Look, one click could cost a company $46 million, right? And be done for $46 million, right? It is driving home with the average user the importance of this and the consequences of what could happen if we're not diligent about what we click, what we look at, those kinds of things. We are the weakest link. We are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on our fortress, right, on the perimeter, right? But I can tell you from experience, because we see it every single day. Okay, if somehow a threat actor managed to get past that moat, right, past that wall, it is. Please, sir, go ahead. Right, move along.
Yeah.
Look, the longest we have found, okay, of a threat actor, the dwell time, they call it, right? The time between, your systems are infiltrated and the time that he or she is discovered, right? That dwell time. The longest we found is 19 months.
Mm-hmm.
There was a threat actor within 3 months, because a lot of them, like you were saying earlier, Ryan, they're just sort of they're already inside. They're just waiting for a new 0-day or a new vulnerability to be announced and then exploited. They're not using these known vulnerabilities to break in. They've already broken in.
So
They're
then,
just going to I'm
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, Juan. I was just going to say, well, because the example that you gave us, where basically it seems like a ransomware attack might be imminent, shut down some of your systems, right? And then they didn't react quite swiftly enough, is a pretty extreme example in terms of like both the consequences and the reaction or the action that needed to be taken in that case. Now, there are other times where maybe an attack isn't quite so imminent; it still might be priority, but maybe not. Something is
Right.
literally about to happen at any moment. So, in that case, I'd be curious to ask you, what would you identify as some of the most important actions that you can take, whether it be when you do get a fairly high priority piece of threat intel, like here's a new campaign that might be affecting you or your clients. Would it be changes in certain controls and policies? Would it be security awareness messages? Would it be maybe you're going to be using those IOCs to go threat hunting? What would be the top of your list for the most important reactions? And maybe as part of that, since we're talking a little bit about like dwell time and time to respond, what would you consider to be, for some of these most important actions that you can take, an acceptable reaction time for your organization to implement from
Yeah.
initial receipt of that intel to actually taking the response?
Right. So the threat hunting aspect of it is probably the number one, step there. Second step, actually maybe 1A, is talk with the community at large, right? Look, we speak we talk with people with whom we compete and people with whom we work to, all the other digital forensic investigators, large financial institutions share data, large hospital chains share data, that kind of thing. That always helps. Not as much anymore as it used to back in the past when the most of the data that was stolen is credit card data, and you wanted to do a common points of compromise assessment, right, to figure out where this whole thing started. So you'd be calling each other, right? There would be a lot more interaction there, but it's still critical to again, just share data and ask around the community. Hey, are you seeing this? This is what we're seeing. We have an advantage, an almost unfair advantage, to be honest, because we own the pipes, right? Verizon owns the pipes. So if and when it is asked of us, within limits, there's legalities and everything that has to be accounted for. This is not a Wild West. We can't just look at anything and everything. But with the right permissions, with the right legal actions and everything, we can indeed take a look at the segment and figure out what's going on there. And oftentimes we do see patterns. So I would say. I know it sounds cliche, but good threat intelligence, dark web hunting, the sharing of information with your peers, that goes such a long way. For all the intel feeds that are out there, and everybody has a multitude of them, you would be surprised, right? How unique some of those can be as well, right? So we always love to we gather a lot of information from our own MSSP. Gets data fed from our penetration testing teams. And by the way, I don't think we're unique. I think most of SSPs do this, right? They get data from their consultants out there, their ethical hackers, the digital forensic investigators, the threat intelligence, right? And that is why oftentimes an MSSP is a lot more efficient in detecting threats than you are on your own, right? Because an MSSP is going to have data and resources available to it almost immediately that you may not have in your own SOC, right? So yeah, the sharing of data, the threat intelligence, you never know what you don't know, obviously. I think those are the top things that come to my mind as far as Now, then on the other side of that is the education aspect of it with the users, obviously, and that's been an interesting struggle. We're getting better, but still a struggle with the end users.
Well, see, you mentioned, and what I think is fascinating, you have that data, right? Your intelligence reports and the access to the pipes. I think, again, one of the attributes of people who do this for a living, we're hungry for that kind of input. With the avalanche of information that comes through, right? It's hard to know which ones are the great big ideas. So before we let you go today, because we can talk about this stuff for hours.
Yeah.
There's so much fascinating stuff, and I love those real world examples. If you're thinking of it in the context of your exact, the actual reports that you guys put out there, the data breach investigation report that you've mentioned. I want to put that in the context of a segment that we often refer to as what scares you, right? Like, because again, the sky's always falling. There's always a new threat. There's always something going on out there. And we try not to be Chicken Little, but some stuff actually comes through. So A, what are some of the big takeaways from the report this year? And B, which one of those actually makes you go, that one might actually be gnarly?
I'll tell you the run of the mill ones, and then I'll get into a little bit more in depth. But ransomware. You would be surprised how often companies just simply are not ready to deal with ransomware attack. It is going to happen to you. You know how we used to say there's only two types of companies: one, the company that has been breached, and the company that doesn't know that it's been breached, right? It's the same thing with ransomware. It's only a matter of time, right? Either you've been a victim of ransomware or you're going to be a victim of ransomware. Yet, again, it's the little things like this. For example, should you have a crypto wallet as a company, right? And if so, for how much? What is your number? How much are you willing to pay? What is your timeline? How long are you willing to be offline, right? By the way, if we disclose, are we breaking any laws? So there's all these things that people don't consider when talking about right. It's not just the attack itself. It's how you react to it that is actually more important. What scares me though, two things. One of them is being artificial intelligence. We're already starting to see some cases of folks using ChatGPT, I guess it's called, right? For example, to create malware. Okay, now it's been said that they're taking steps to ensure that it doesn't do nefarious activity. But I'm not asking it to create malware. I'm asking it to create me a software that does this. It doesn't know any better, right? I'm going to ask it to write some code in Python. And by the way, they do a decent job. Now, right now, it's still very rudimentary, but it's going to get better, right? The malware that is coming out of these AI engines is it's not really good right now. But give it 3 years, and we'll see, right? So that scares me. But let me tell you what scares me more than anything is the gap in personnel. Okay, one of the reasons I theorize why we don't seem to be making as much progress as we think we should be is because there's this vicious little life cycle. A CISO comes in, and he or she is going to do a maturity assessment to figure out what the gaps are because they need to know, right? They put together some kind of roadmap, some kind of master plan, right? By the way, the CISO has a head count of 20, but only 11 of those are filled, and 3 of those are borrowed from another team, right? So they're doing the best they can with basically skeleton people because there is no, people leave, easily. People don't stay in jobs anymore, but CISOs don't either, right? So the average stay at a CISO is about 20, 22 months, not even 2 years. I cannot tell you how often go into a company or a client and talk to a CISO. And if I go back 2 years later and the same CISO is still there, my first reaction is, oh my God, you're still here? Wow. Right? So what happens is he or she comes in and the new sheriff comes in and this is what we're going to do. And for the first 12, 13 months, everything runs smoothly, right? We're going to put, Verizon or any consultant came in and they did an assessment. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put the roadmap together. I need this much money. I need these many people, blah, blah, blah. Within 13 months, I should say, it dies off. It starts losing steam. Okay. And then 10 months later, that CISO leaves. Then there's another gap of 2 or 3 months before a new CISO comes in. Then a new CISO comes in and he or she says, well, this is how we're going to do things. And they start all over again. Okay. So there's no consistency and there's no continuity. Right? Is it a surprise then that we seem to somehow be losing the battle, even though there's money being thrown at this? Right? Because it isn't about the money, it's about the people. And when the people don't stay in one role long enough to even make a difference, you're going to have this kind of situation. So really, that's what scares more than anything else, more than AI. Eventually, AI, we will figure it out, right? We have very smart people that will figure out how to combat whatever AI comes at us with. But the idea, I read the number. What is it? I think it's like 3 million jobs short in this industry, something like that, right? And that's not expected to abate anytime soon. But yeah, that's why it's that little vicious life cycle of personnel. It's a revolving door. By the way, just all the way from the top, all the way to your analyst, right?
Yep.
So there's no consistency and no continuity. That right there is what scares me.
See, I think that is a fantastic point, and specifically to our audience. You
Yeah.
people who are listening are MSSPs, and Juan touched on this earlier. It is very likely, it's not just possible, it's very likely that your contract with a customer will actually span more than one CISO, right?
Right.
When it comes right down to it, this is a killer irony in the industry. You're the third party, you're the external service provider, and yet you are the one who has the continuity with that customer's system
Exactly.
and their environment, and that's a position of value and strength from which a service provider ought to be approaching and saying, I understand you're the new sheriff. I understand you want to bring in. Let me show you level set and baseline Now let's figure out where we need to go. Short
Right.
circuit that thing right away.
Yeah, the really good one is when a new sheriff comes into town and they say, no, we're going to bring everything in-house, for example, right? We see this all the time, right? It's too expensive. I don't want to do an MSSP, whatever the case may be, right? And then after about 3 or 4 months, they realize exactly what you said, Ryan, that MSSP, that service provider, is the only consistent thing that's within that program, right? And that overhauling that thing is just not going to be worth it. We see it all the time. We see it all the time. But you're absolutely right. Oftentimes, it is that services provider who is the glue that is holding it together, while there's this big, revolving door of roles and CISOs and CIOs, above them. Yep. No question.
Which brings the whole conversation back full circle, right? Talking about maybe, overreactions to things, and there are no real overreactions in security when there's but maybe one overreaction is a CISO coming in and immediately saying, I'm going to change everything and get rid of this MSSP. That is an overreaction because suddenly they realize, you know what? Maybe that's not so wise.
But sometimes they're brought in with that in mind. Right. Somebody, CEO, CIO, somebody, CFO is telling them, listen, man, we're spending way too much money in this MSP. You need to figure out how to so sometimes they come really with their hands shackled already, right? But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That is indeed an overreaction.
Right. But other than that, like you said, in terms of responding to threat intelligence, always better to overreact a little bit than certainly underreact and then have a situation like that ransomware attack that you were talking about. So thanks very much, Juan. I would also be remiss not to at least mention that the next Verizon data breach investigations report, the 2023 version, I know will be coming out fairly soon. I know you can't really tell us anything much about it in terms of what we expect to see, but at least we'll give our audience a little bit of a heads up to keep an eye out for the next one.
Yep.
So,
coming on in the next couple of weeks should be out. So yeah,
all right, awesome. All right, well, we'll keep an eye out for that. But in the meantime, that's going to wrap up the first half of our show. But please return for the second half of our episode, which is going to feature our MSSP industry and market strategy topic of the week, the RSA conference, how to stand out on the show floor. That plus our InfoSec news rundown and our Dear Cyber for Hire advice column segment, all coming up. So we'll see you in a moment on the other side.